Elena Davis lived in a small town nestled between gentle hills and wide-open fields. The kind of town where everyone knew each other's business, sometimes before the person even knew it themselves. Houses were close together, and the streets were quiet, except for the occasional hum of a car or the laughter of children playing outside. Elena's home was modest but well kept, with a small garden in the front where she grew marigolds and herbs. She was known in the town for her quiet nature and kind heart. She taught at the local school and often went out of her way to help students and neighbors alike, never expecting anything in return. One particularly cold winter evening, the wind howled through the streets, rattling the windows of Elena's home. Snow had begun to fall earlier that afternoon, thick and heavy, covering the roads in a soft, white blanket. The kind of snow that made the world seem silent, except for the occasional creak of tree branches under the weight of frost. Elena had finished her evening chores and was sitting by the fireplace, sipping hot tea, enjoying the warmth that spread through her home. Her cat, Whiskers, purred contentedly at her feet, and for a moment, the outside world seemed far away. Then, through the frosted window, she noticed a figure moving slowly along the street. At first, she thought it was another neighbor rushing home. But as she looked closer, she saw the man was staggering slightly, his coat thin and worn, barely enough to protect him from the bitter cold. His hat was soaked, and his boots were covered in snow. Elena's heart ached at the sight. She had seen people in need before, but there was something about the man's struggle that made her stomach tighten. He looked exhausted, almost frozen, as though the cold had seeped into his bones. Without thinking twice, Elena grabbed her coat and opened the door, stepping out into the icy wind. "Are you okay?" she called softly, her voice carrying over the quiet street. The man turned toward her, his eyes wide and tired. For a moment, he said nothing, just stared at her with a mix of relief and hesitation. Then he nodded slightly, shivering as he took a step closer. "My name is Michael," he said in a low voice, almost muffled by the wind. I didn't know where to go. Elena didn't hesitate. "Come inside. You'll be warm there," she said gently. She led him into the warmth of her home, shutting the door behind him, and immediately noticing the difference the shelter made. Michael's shoulders relaxed as he felt the heat wash over him. He sat down on the couch, still shivering, while Elena set about getting him something to eat and drink. She poured him a cup of tea and handed him a blanket. "Here," she said. "This will help you warm up." Michael accepted it with a grateful nod, wrapping it around himself like a lifeline. He looked around Elena's home, eyes landing on the small photographs on the wall. Her family, her late husband, her students at school. "You live alone?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Elena replied, not surprised by the question. She had grown accustomed to living alone, but she didn't feel lonely in the same way some people might. She had her routines, her work, her students, and sometimes she had moments like this, where helping someone else gave her life a little more meaning. Michael's story unfolded slowly. He had recently lost his job, and with it, the apartment he could barely afford. The town had no shelters that were open at that hour, and he had been wandering the streets for hours, hoping to find someone who might offer help. Elena listened carefully, nodding as he spoke, understanding the depth of his struggle. She didn't ask questions meant to judge or pry. She simply listened. That, she knew, was often the kindest thing she could do for someone. The fire crackled in the fireplace as Michael's hands slowly warmed. Elena brought out a plate of warm bread and soup she had prepared earlier for herself, offering it to him. "Eat," she said kindly. "You must be very hungry." Michael hesitated, embarrassed by his own hunger. But the inviting smile on Elena's face made him feel safe. Slowly, he took a piece of bread and a sip of the soup. The warmth of the food and the drink seemed to bring him back to life, little by little. Elena watched him carefully. She wasn't used to strangers coming into her home, but something about Michael's quiet, respectful demeanor reassured her. She had helped people before, but usually it had been neighbors, friends, or her students. Helping a stranger was different. It required a leap of faith, but Elena had always believed that acts of kindness were never wasted. Hours passed, and the snow continued to fall outside, creating a quiet cocoon around the house. Michael spoke little, but his gratitude was clear in the way he carefully sipped his tea and in the occasional smile that flickered across his face. Elena didn't push him to talk. She simply sat across from him, knitting quietly, while listening to the occasional sigh or the soft words he spoke. There was a comfort in the silence, a shared understanding that sometimes words were not necessary. By the time the clock ticked past midnight, the storm outside had worsened. Elena knew that sending Michael back into the freezing night was out of the question. He needed a place to rest, if only for a few hours. "You can stay here tonight," she offered. "Just until the storm passes. Tomorrow, we can figure something out." Michael's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of relief and embarrassment flashing across his face. "I don't want to trouble you," he said quietly. "You're not troubling me," Elena said firmly. "Everyone deserves warmth and safety." "It's what's right." Michael finally nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He felt, for the first time in days, that he was not invisible, that someone cared. Elena showed him to a spare bedroom she rarely used, laying out a blanket and pillow. She insisted he rest, while she cleaned up the small mess from their evening together. Even though the situation was unusual, she found a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had helped someone in need. As she returned to her own room, Elena paused by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. The town was quiet, almost as if it too were holding its breath. She wondered what her neighbors might think if they knew she had taken in a stranger. Part of her knew that in a town like this, people would talk, and perhaps misunderstand her actions, but she pushed the thought aside. Some things were more important than gossip, kindness, empathy, and the simple act of helping another human being when they were in need. In the stillness of the night, Elena felt a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Hope that she had done the right thing, and uncertainty about how the world outside would react. But for that night at least, Michael was safe, warm, and cared for. Little did Elena know that this simple act of compassion, this quiet decision to help a man in need, would soon ripple through the town in ways she could never have imagined. For now, though, the house was filled with the warmth of the fire, the soft sounds of breathing, and the quiet comfort that comes from knowing that even in a cold and challenging world, kindness still had a place. The next morning, the sun rose weakly over the snow-covered town, casting a pale glow over the rooftops and streets. Elena woke early, her mind buzzing with thoughts about the previous night. She quietly moved through her kitchen, making herself a cup of tea, careful not to wake Michael, who was still sleeping in the spare room. Despite the early hour, she felt restless, not because of worry, but because she was already thinking about what the day might bring. She had expected nothing more than gratitude from Michael, and perhaps a quiet moment of reflection from herself. But living in a small town meant that news traveled fast, and people's imaginations often ran faster than the facts. Elena knew that if anyone discovered that she had taken in a stranger, there would be questions she was prepared to answer truthfully. But she also knew that the truth could be twisted. By the time she stepped outside to clear some of the snow from her porch, she noticed the first signs that the town was already stirring. Neighbors were walking to work or shoveling their driveways, and the chatter of people bundled in coats and scarves floated faintly on the cold air. Elena's routine walk to the local market usually took her past several familiar faces, and she had always exchanged polite greetings and brief conversations. But today, she noticed something different. There were glances that lingered too long, whispers that stopped abruptly when she approached, and a strange tension in the air that she could not immediately place. At the market, Elena tried to focus on her errands. She picked up vegetables, bread, and some milk, greeting the shopkeepers politely. But the moment she stepped inside, she sensed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. People looked at her curiously, almost suspiciously, and she began to overhear fragments of conversation as she passed the aisles. "Did you hear about Elena?" one woman whispered. "I think she had someone staying in her house last night." Elena's stomach tightened. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that people would always talk, especially in a small town where rumors spread like wildfire. She kept her head down, paid for her groceries, and returned home, hoping that by avoiding confrontation, the situation would pass. She was wrong. By the time she walked back, a few neighbors had already gathered near her gate, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Some smiled politely, while others stared a little too long, their eyes sharp, with unspoken questions. Elena felt a wave of discomfort, but she reminded herself of Michael, safe in her home, and tried to ignore the whispers. Michael had woken by then and was sitting at the kitchen table, eating breakfast Elena had prepared. He looked healthier than the previous night, the warmth and food helping to restore some color to his cheeks. "Thank you for yesterday," he said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done out there." "You don't need to thank me," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice calm despite the uneasy feeling in her chest. "Everyone deserves help when they need it. You were just in the wrong place, at the wrong time." Michael nodded, and for a moment, there was a comfortable silence. But then, the sound of a knock on the door interrupted them. Elena frowned. A few neighbors were already peeking through the windows, and she had a feeling that whoever was at the door had come with more than just a casual visit. When she opened the door, she found Mrs. Harper, one of the town's longtime residents, standing there with her arms crossed. Her expression was a mix of concern and judgment. "Elena," she said, her voice low but pointed, "I hear there was a man in your house last night. Is that true?" Elena felt a pang of frustration. "Yes," she admitted calmly. "He was cold and had nowhere to go. I offered him warmth and food. That's all." Mrs. Harper's lips pressed into a thin line. "People are talking, Elena. They say things that don't sound right. You know how quickly rumors spread in this town." Elena took a deep breath. She had anticipated this, but the reality of facing neighbors' suspicion was still unsettling. "I understand," she said gently. "But helping someone in need shouldn't be seen as wrong. He's just a man who needed warmth and food. That's all." Mrs. Harper shook her head. "I hope you know what you're doing. People are quick to judge, and some things are never forgotten." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Elena with a sense of unease she couldn't shake. As the day wore on, the whispers only grew louder. When Elena went out to fetch the mail, she noticed groups of neighbors talking in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward her. Children at the school where she taught asked awkward questions, their innocence making her feel even more self-conscious. Even her colleagues at the school seemed to avoid her, exchanging looks and quiet comments when they thought she wasn't listening. Michael noticed the change in Elena's demeanor and tried to reassure her. "Don't worry about them," he said one afternoon as they sat by the fire, watching the snow fall outside. "They don't know the whole story. Let them talk. You did the right thing." Elena nodded, grateful for his words. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the town's judgment was closing in around her. Even simple tasks, like shopping or walking down the street, had become exercises in patience and courage. She had always believed that kindness was its own reward, but now she realized that in a small town, even kindness could be misunderstood. By evening, the tension reached a new level. A few townspeople had started to spread exaggerations about her actions, claiming that she had invited strangers into her home frequently, or that she was somehow involved in something scandalous. Elena's friends who knew her well began to speak up, defending her quietly. But the damage was done. The rumors had taken on a life of their own. Despite all this, Elena remained steadfast. She refused to let the judgment of others dictate her actions. She continued to help Michael, offering him meals, a warm place to rest, and guidance for finding work and shelter. Slowly, Michael began to regain his confidence. He cleaned up around the house, cooked small meals, and even offered to help Elena with chores. Their relationship remained purely platonic, built on mutual respect and gratitude. But the town's whispers continued to haunt her. One morning, as Elena walked through the town square, she overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. Two women were speaking in hushed tones, their faces tight with gossip. "I don't know why she does it," one said. "Bringing a stranger into her house like that? It's not right. We do." End quote. "I think's." End quote. "We do." End quote. Elena felt a pang of sadness, not for herself, but for the way people could twist something good into something negative. She wanted to shout, to tell them the truth, but she knew that in a town like this, reason rarely won over rumor. She took a deep breath and continued walking, reminding herself that her actions were guided by her heart, not by the opinion of others. Back at home, Michael noticed the worry in Elena's eyes. "You're letting them get to you," he said gently. "You can't control what people think. You can only control what you do." Elena smiled faintly. He was right, of course. But she also knew that the road ahead would be challenging. The town's scrutiny was only beginning, and she had to prepare herself for more whispers, more judgment, and perhaps even public confrontation. Yet, despite it all, she remained resolute. She had opened her home and her heart to someone in need, and she would not let fear or gossip stop her from doing what she believed was right. As night fell, the snow continued to blanket the town in silence. Elena and Michael sat together by the fire, drinking tea and talking quietly. Outside, the world was harsh and unforgiving, but inside her home, there was warmth, understanding, and a quiet courage that refused to be shaken. Elena knew that the days ahead would be difficult. The town's judgment might grow louder, and rumors might continue to spread. But she also knew that her small act of kindness had made a difference in one man's life. And sometimes, she thought, that was worth facing the world alone. As days turned into a week, Elena Davis felt the growing weight of the town's scrutiny pressing on her. What had begun as quiet whispers now seemed to follow her everywhere she went. Even familiar streets and friendly faces felt charged with suspicion. The once comforting small-town atmosphere had shifted into one where every glance and every conversation seemed to carry judgment. Elena tried her best to maintain her routine. She continued teaching at the school, prepared meals for herself and Michael, and tended to her garden, letting the rhythms of everyday life anchor her. Yet, the tension she felt every time she stepped outside her front door was becoming harder to ignore. Some neighbors avoided her entirely, crossing the street when they saw her, while others stared with subtle, pointed curiosity. Even friendly greetings were now tinged with a hint of suspicion. At school, the situation had become more complicated. Rumors had reached the ears of students, who asked questions awkwardly in the middle of class or whispered to each other when she was not looking. "Why is that man staying at Miss Davis' house?" they would murmur, their innocent curiosity tangled with echoes of adult speculation. Elena answered carefully, emphasizing only that he needed help and that everyone deserves kindness, hoping to teach her students a lesson in empathy despite the gossip swirling around them. Outside of school, the scrutiny intensified. One afternoon, a group of town residents gathered near the market, speaking in low voices and glancing toward her home. Elena could hear fragments of their conversation as she walked past. "It's not just one night," one woman whispered. "Who knows what else she's doing?" Another voice added, "People like her always have a reason, and it's never simple." Elena's heart sank. She knew she could not control what people said or how they interpreted her actions, but the sting of false judgment cut deeper than she had expected. Word eventually reached the local authorities. Anonymous calls were made, questioning her behavior and insinuating that taking in a stranger might involve improper intentions. Elena received a polite but firm notice, requesting a meeting to clarify the circumstances surrounding Michael staying at her home. The official tone of the letter contrasted sharply with the fear and tension she felt, and for the first time, she realized how serious the situation could become. Michael noticed her growing anxiety and tried to reassure her. "Elena, you're doing the right thing," he said one evening, as they sat together in the living room. "You're helping someone who genuinely needs it. That's not something to feel guilty about." 4. Elena nodded, grateful for his support. She knew that the authorities would ask questions, and although she had done nothing wrong, the pressure of explaining her actions to strangers and having those explanations potentially twisted was unnerving. She also understood that the town's gossip could affect her reputation permanently if she did not handle it carefully. When the day of the meeting arrived, Elena dressed carefully and left Michael at home, assuring him that she would return quickly. The town hall was quiet when she arrived, except for the curious eyes of a few onlookers in the lobby. She was guided into a small office, where a local officer and a social services representative were waiting. Their expressions were polite but serious, their questions precise and formal. "Miss Davis," the officer began, "we received reports regarding a man staying at your home. Can you explain the circumstances?" "Davis." Elena took a deep breath. "Yes," she said clearly. "His name is Michael Carter. He was caught in the cold, had nowhere to stay, and I offered him warmth and food. That is all. I have not asked for anything in return, and there is no other situation here. He is safe, and he left my home only when he found proper arrangements for shelter." The representatives listened, nodding occasionally, taking notes. They asked further questions about how long he had been at her house, whether anyone else was involved, and if there had been any prior incidents. Elena answered each question calmly, sticking to the truth without adding any unnecessary details. After what felt like hours, the meeting concluded. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Davis," the social worker said. "Based on what you've told us, there is no reason for further action. However, we encourage you to be careful about inviting strangers into your home in the future." 1 Pete 22:9, 2I4 Pete. I-teen, 2I4. Elena left the town hall feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. The official confirmation that she had done nothing wrong should have eased her mind, but she knew that the town's judgmental eyes would not disappear so easily. People would continue to talk, and some would never see her actions as purely compassionate. Back at home, she was met with Michael's warm smile and a small gesture of kindness. He had prepared tea and set it on the table, knowing she needed comfort after the tense day. Elena felt a deep sense of gratitude. Michael had become more than just someone she helped. He was now a quiet support, a reminder that acts of kindness created meaningful connections, even when the world seemed harsh. Despite this small comfort, the whispers in the town continued. Flyers with exaggerated claims about Elena's actions appeared, not officially sanctioned, but circulated widely. Parents at the school questioned her behavior, some politely, others with thinly veiled suspicion. Even friends, who had once defended her, now hesitated, worried about being associated with controversy. Elena felt the isolation keenly, but she remained steadfast, focusing on the small circle of people who knew the truth. One morning, she noticed that strangers were stopping near her house, looking over fences, snapping pictures with phones, and speculating about what they saw. She realized that what started as simple gossip had escalated into public scrutiny. Elena felt the weight of this attention pressing on her chest, but she refused to let fear rule her actions. Helping Michael had been the right thing to do, and that belief anchored her in moments of doubt. Meanwhile, Michael had been making progress in his own life. He found temporary work, started saving a little money, and applied for housing programs that could provide stability. His gratitude for Elena's help never wavered, and he often expressed how her support had given him the strength to rebuild his life. Yet the town's judgment remained relentless. The more Michael regained stability, the more people twisted the story, claiming that he was only staying because of favoritism or secret motives. Some parents of students demanded explanations, and Elena's professional reputation was tested in ways she had never imagined. Despite these pressures, Elena faced each day with quiet resilience. She refused to engage with those who gossiped or made assumptions, focusing instead on the work she loved teaching and helping those in need. She discovered that true strength came from acting with integrity, even when no one was watching, and sometimes even when everyone seemed to be judging. One evening, after a long day, Elena sat by the fire with Michael, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. "I never imagined that doing something kind could cause so much trouble," she said softly. Michael smiled gently. "Kindness always carries risk," he said, "but it's the right choice, even when the world doesn't understand. You've made a difference in my life, and that matters more than anyone's opinion." Elena nodded, feeling a quiet sense of peace. She realized that she could not control the town, the rumors, or the judgmental glances, but she could control her actions, her intentions, and the compassion she showed. That realization gave her strength, even as she prepared for the continuing scrutiny and whispers that seemed to grow louder each day. As the night deepened, Elena felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She knew that the days ahead would continue to challenge her, that she would face questions, gossip, and perhaps even more formal inquiries. But she also knew that she had done what was right, and that sometimes the hardest trials were the ones that tested courage, integrity, and the willingness to stand by one's principles. Outside, the snow had begun to melt slightly, signaling the slow approach of spring. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of a grateful friend reminded Elena that acts of kindness, though sometimes misunderstood, created lasting impact. She had faced judgment, scrutiny, and fear. Yet she had not wavered. And in that quiet resolve, she found the strength to continue, knowing that truth and compassion would eventually prevail. The days after the town hall meeting continued to be tense for Elena. Even though the authorities had confirmed that she had done nothing wrong, the whispers in the town persisted. Flyers still circulated. Conversations stopped when she approached, and every step outside felt like walking under invisible eyes. But amidst this pressure, Elena noticed small, quiet changes. Some neighbors who had stayed distant began to nod politely, acknowledging her presence without words. Others offered small gestures of kindness. A wave from across the street. A brief conversation at the market. Elena realized that changing people's opinions would not happen overnight. Small acts, patience, and consistency would be necessary. She reminded herself that her goal was not to convince everyone of her intentions, but to continue living with honesty and kindness. Regardless of the town's gossip, Michael, now more stable, had been doing his best to ease the tension around Elena. He kept his presence quiet, helping her with chores, running errands, and spending time away from public spaces to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. Yet, despite their precautions, the town's curiosity and skepticism remained. One morning, as Elena walked to school, she noticed a small group of students standing by the playground. Their expressions were hesitant, and they seemed unsure how to approach her. When she neared, one of them, a quiet boy named Sam, stepped forward. "Miss Davis," he said softly. We were talking, and some of us think maybe we were wrong. Maybe it's okay to help people." Elena's heart lifted. "Thank you, Sam," she said gently. "It's always right to help someone in need, even if others don't understand at first. You should be proud of thinking about kindness." The boy nodded and walked back to his friends, who smiled quietly at Elena. She realized in that moment that while adults could be slow to accept change, the younger generation might already be learning from her example. That thought gave her renewed strength to face the continuing challenges. At home, Elena and Michael continued their routines, though now with a sense of cautious optimism. Michael's confidence grew as he worked, saved money, and explored long-term housing options. Elena encouraged him gently, teaching him small skills, sharing advice, and celebrating his achievements, no matter how minor they seemed. Their connection had become one of mutual respect, trust, and quiet friendship, an anchor in a storm of uncertainty. Despite these personal victories, the town's judgment did not fade immediately. One afternoon, a small gathering at the market became an uncomfortable moment for Elena. Several women whispered loudly, drawing attention as she passed. Their words were exaggerated, suggesting motives and actions that Elena knew were false. The confrontation could have escalated, but she took a deep breath and chose not to react. Instead, she smiled, politely, nodded, and continued her walk. The act of maintaining dignity, even under scrutiny, was itself a quiet victory. Over time, a few key moments began to shift public perception. A local newspaper ran a story about the challenges faced by homeless individuals during the harsh winter, highlighting the importance of community support. Although Elena's name was not mentioned, many townspeople began to reconsider the actions she had taken. Conversations shifted slightly from judgment to understanding, and curiosity slowly gave way to empathy. Meanwhile, Michael finally received approval for temporary housing assistance. The news brought relief to both him and Elena. He was grateful for the support she had given, knowing that without her, he might still be struggling in the cold. When he told her about the approved housing, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her efforts had made a tangible difference in someone's life. The day Michael moved into his new home, a few neighbors watched quietly as he packed his things. Some offered hesitant smiles. Others simply nodded in acknowledgement. Elena stood on her porch, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and a little sadness. Their time together had been brief but meaningful, a testament to the quiet power of compassion and the difference one person could make. Even with Michael settled, Elena remained mindful of the lingering whispers. She continued to live openly with integrity, helping students, supporting neighbors when she could, and showing that acts of kindness were not selfish or scandalous. Slowly, people began to see her as the person she truly was: compassionate, strong, and unwavering in her principles. A few weeks later, the town organized a community event to clean and restore a small park that had fallen into disrepair. Elena volunteered, as she often did, working alongside neighbors and students. Michael, now more confident and self-sufficient, also joined, helping carry tools and tidy the area. The collective effort drew attention, and as people saw Elena actively contributing to the community, the old rumors began to lose their hold. Parents and neighbors who had once whispered behind closed doors now observed her work firsthand. They saw her dedication, patience, and the quiet encouragement she gave to young volunteers. Slowly, admiration replaced suspicion. The lesson was clear. Actions mattered far more than gossip, and consistency could undo even the strongest rumors. One afternoon, as the park cleanup was winding down, Mrs. Harper, the neighbor who had initially questioned Elena, approached her. This time, her expression was softer, less judgmental. "Elena," she said, "I think I misjudged you. I see now that what you did was good. You helped someone in need, and you've shown patience and kindness to all of us. I just didn't understand at first." Elena smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. I understand why people might have questions, but I believe that helping others is always worth it, even if it's misunderstood at first." Mrs. Harper nodded. "Yes, I think the town is finally starting to see that too. By the end of spring, Elena noticed a profound change in the town's atmosphere. The whispers had largely faded, replaced by casual conversations and genuine curiosity about how they could help others. Children told stories about the importance of kindness and helping people in need. Parents spoke to their friends about how small acts could create real impact. Even local teachers began highlighting empathy and compassion in their classrooms. Elena's own life had returned to a sense of normalcy, though enriched by the experience. She had faced judgment, scrutiny, and misunderstanding, yet she had remained steadfast in her principles. Her friendship with Michael had blossomed into a story of resilience, trust, and mutual respect, showing the quiet power of one person's good intentions. Michael's new home became a symbol of hope not just for him, but for the town. People saw that the outcome of Elena's actions had been positive, tangible, and life-changing. Slowly, the story of her kindness replaced the scandal that had once clouded her reputation. In the end, Elena realized that living with integrity meant accepting that others might not always understand her actions. But she also understood that truth, patience, and consistent kindness had the power to change minds and hearts over time. She had faced fear, judgment, and isolation, yet she had never wavered in her compassion. One quiet evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sun set over the rooftops, Elena reflected on the past months. The town had tested her courage and resilience, but in the process, she had learned valuable lessons about human nature, community, and the enduring power of kindness. Michael visited occasionally, stopping by for tea, to share news, or simply to enjoy a conversation. Their friendship remained strong, grounded in mutual respect and gratitude. They had both grown in ways they had never anticipated, shaped by hardship, trust, and the simple act of sheltering someone in need. Elena smiled as she watched children playing in the park, neighbors greeting one another warmly, and the town moving forward with a newfound sense of empathy. She understood that the journey had not been easy, but it had been meaningful. Her good deed, once misunderstood and twisted into scandal, had ultimately become a story of hope, courage, and the quiet triumph of doing what is right. The snow of winter had melted, the town had warmed, and Elena's heart, strengthened by challenge and compassion, had grown even stronger. She had sheltered someone not just from the cold, but also from despair, and in doing so, she had reminded her town of the simple, enduring truth that kindness, honesty, and courage could withstand even the harshest judgment.